to Author Nation Interviews. This is your go-to podcast for elevating your author journey, and I'm your host, Melody Ann, and I'm thrilled to have you with us today. Today we're talking about telling difficult personal stories. We're also going to be talking about working with a book coach to develop a story for readers rather than for yourself. And as part of this vibrant Author Nation community, go check out authornation.online to find resources that will support your author journey. All right, let me introduce our guest. I'm so excited to have Gil Merrick with us today. He served as a team leader with the U.S. Equestrian Federation at the 2007 Pan American Games and the 2008 Olympic Games. He has spent a lifetime balancing his love for horses and equestrian sport with a career managing multinational organizations. After 25 years of training corporate executives, entrepreneurs, and high-performance athletes, he is dedicated to sharing his insights about living life masterfully through his online training programs at Mastery Concepts. And Gil recently published his first book, Haunted Victory. Welcome, Gil. It's lovely to have you here.
Thanks very much for asking me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited about your new book. Now, it just came out, didn't it?
It is on Amazon, and I'm doing a soft launch with my advanced readers, and I plan to hit the go button next week.
That is so exciting. Well, congratulations on that. I'd like to go back just a little bit, just before even the book was birthed. What started you on the path to just writing your story?
Well, the sexual abuse that I suffered as a child went on for 7 years. It started when I was 14 years old and went until I was 21, which is when I left college and was able to get away from my predator. And amazingly, and I explained why this is amazing in the story, it took 20 years before I understood that I had actually been abused. And that's typical of people who have experienced trauma over time, complex PTSD. And so after 20 years, I was wrestling with both depression and my addictions, predominantly alcohol, but also recreational drugs. And so I went into therapy, and that's when I heard for the first time that I had suffered abuse. So I was in therapy for 2 years, and we worked through that. And I moved then from Ohio, where this was happening, to California. And so I stopped the program of therapy. It turns out it was another 20 years before I went into therapy again. And this time it was part of my recovery treatment from my alcoholism. And that therapist, and this began just 3.5 years ago, she was the one who pointed out that I'd actually suffered through trauma. And it wasn't just abuse, but it was traumatic. And I learned the term complex PTSD, that it's not one individual incident like maybe a car wreck or someone who's experienced in war, but something that persisted over a period of years. And then after a year of that therapy, I was moving again. I was moving to Florida, where I live now. And I knew that therapy was going to end. And my therapist suggested, she said, we've looked through a lot of issues in your life and you've really dug in and taken a look. She said, I would recommend that what you do next is write your life story. And her recommendation was to write it for me as a therapeutic exercise. And to do that, I had to create a chronology, because I've traveled my whole life. I've lived all over the world. So I put together a spreadsheet, and I got out my old passports, and I logged in every city I'd been to and my entry dates and my exit dates, and I threw a chronology together. And then I had to ask the question, why was I there and what was I doing? And then I got into the question, and then why did I leave? What choice did I make? And what was next? And once I had done that, I was able to write my story. And I've never written anything other than financial publications and things related to my work, corporate publications, but never something for a reader. So it wasn't that difficult to write my story for me. But then a friend of mine said, I think you have a story that would help people if you'd share it. And then it became this task of, okay, how do I turn this very long story that I wrote for me into a memoir that would help other people?
Yeah. Beautiful. And before we get into that, because I do want to get into the writing of the story for readers, but before that, I just want to talk a little bit about sexual abuse in men, because it's a little different than sexual abuse that women have faced. So, first off, if I understand, some men don't remember the abuse. And I know some women don't as well, but I think it's more common in men not to remember the abuse and for it to affect people, even though they don't remember it. And then, like you, I think it's very common for boys to not label it as abuse, although they're traumatized by it. They don't label it that way just because of how we treat boys. Do you want to speak just to a little bit about male sexual abuse, and just in case there's someone out there listening, what would you say? What's some of the pieces you want to tell the world?
Well, I think now, having been through a very aggressive course of therapy and then researching for this book, when I came across the statistic that 1 in 6 men have suffered some form of childhood sexual abuse, I was amazed. I really thought I was part of a much smaller population. And when I think about my own situation, and then I think about others who have been subjected to this abuse, whether it's maybe through church or through Boy Scouts or a sports activity, which is the world that I learned it in, um, the immediate thing we're faced with as boys is shame and guilt. There's something wrong with me that I let this happen. And we're terrified that people will question our sexuality. I'm a boy, I've been abused by a man, and I'm not going to tell anybody that I had sexual encounters with a man. That's just, in our society, we don't do that. Now, my abuse occurred from 1971 through 1979, and people were not comfortable yet discussing issues of homosexuality and gay relationships. What it threw me into was a lot of confusion about my own sexuality. I explore it in my story and I resolve it for myself. But I think, given at that time, it was taboos, and I don't know the experience of people after that because I only had that experience. But I think there's much more pressure to suppress it. And because it is so horrifying to entertain that thought, my God, what if I am confused about my sexuality? How did I let this happen? That it is buried. That is something that our subconscious is able to hide. To whatever degree I was hiding that, I left my abuser. In the book, I call it going from the frying pan right into the fire. I immediately went into an environment filled with party, drugs, and alcohol. Disco was king in 1979. I fell right into that world and immediately began self-medicating, predominantly with alcohol. And I wonder how many men who have suppressed this because of the taboo about talking about it have also found some form of self-medication, if in fact they haven't gotten some form of treatment.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I just want to say that self-medication is a solution. So I know people are out there, oh, you're an addict. It's like, no, let's look at it this way. Somebody has found a solution. It may not be the best solution, but they have found a solution. And so when we help people move away from addiction, we're helping them find new solutions, right? It's not all about just like not doing the addictive behavior, but to find new solutions. Um, there's a lot of stigma around addiction, so I always want to just make sure we're talking about it in a way that makes sense. um, so let's move on to talking about writing for the reader. So you've got this, you know huge lifelong story, and somebody says, hey, you know what? If you're willing, I think this could help a lot of people. Maybe you should turn this into a book. And then you found my friend and colleague, Brenda Smith, and you worked with her. She's a book coach. And you went on this new journey of turning that into something for readers. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, Brenda opened my eyes. I gave her the manuscript that was my life story. It was 220,000 words. But I learned how to write. I hadn't ever written before, so it was a lot of words and a lot of exercise. So I'm glad I did it. Plus, it was very therapeutic. My therapist did not steer me wrong with that. And I gained a lot of understanding. But when Brenda read the first draft, she said, Gil, You've led a fascinating life. You have some exciting stories. You write about them well. You put me right there. You've had some real characters in your life and some real adventures. And guess what? You're not a celebrity and nobody cares. I kind of said, well, okay, got that. She said, they don't. They said, if you're a well-known celebrity, they probably do care about all these little parts of your life. They might care what you had for breakfast, but they're not going to care about your stories. Your family will, your friends will. They might get a little bored if they've heard them already, but this isn't something you publish. So we began the work, that first question, what's in it for the reader? Why would someone invest money and then time and energy to work through, in my case, it ended up being 374 pages, so it's 110,000 words. So we took that whole life story, brought it together around, I was able to identify with you and with Brenda probably 7 or 8 themes that run through my book: addiction, sexual confusion, abuse, dreams in our lives, and the effect of my parents in my childhood, all of that. So the first work was to find out, okay, well, what's that thing I'm going to give the reader? And that's where we went towards the being a male, having been subjected to childhood sexual abuse, that I am healing from that, and my addiction, which, to pick up on what you said before, it was incredibly helpful to learn through therapy. It's a disease and it needs to be managed. And I finally had a diagnosis, but I was 63 years old. So in writing the book, part of my message is, if you have things similar to what I had, maybe it won't take you to 63 years old, but if it does, still go get it, manage it and treat it.
Yeah.
So that was the starting point, though, was to ask the question, what is someone going to care about? And they'll only care if I give them something.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And then just for everyone out there, Gil mentioned, Brenda and Gil and me. So just so everyone's clear, we worked as a team. So Brenda was the book coach, I was the editor, and Gil was the author. And so just because you threw that in there, so I just want people to be clear
Oh,
on,
right.
because I only mentioned Brenda's name, so I just want people to be clear on the dynamic. And that's a really actually a good dynamic, to have the book coach and an editor and the author work together, because we wanted to bring it down to as close to 100,000 words as we could. And that's what we did. So, what's the difference between writing it for yourself and writing it for the reader? What did you learn about the difference between those two?
In writing for a reader, I needed to do more thinking and planning around the interiority and the transitions. So I understand now, why did I go from this place to that place? And why did I make this decision? And why did I go here? But for someone who doesn't know me, I need to really think about, what was I experiencing at that point in my life that had me make that decision? And so part of my physical therapy is I walk every day for an hour. That's my part of my physical program. And every single day I use that hour to focus on those questions. I worked on the interiority and the transition, and only through the perspective of, somebody's picked up this book, they don't know me from Adam. How is this going to make sense to them? And I don't want to leave someone at the end of a chapter going, this makes no sense to me. Why would someone do that? I haven't had this situation in my life. Kind of understand how he got here, but what makes someone do that? Why did he go back to the predator after he escaped? Things like that really required thought. And that was the difference. In just writing my story, I was comfortable to just keep moving. And then I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this, because it was interesting to me.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So if you'd like to learn more about Gil, you can find more out about Gil at gilmerrick.com. There's also a link to the book there, which you can get as an ebook, paperback, and an audiobook, by the way. So Gil, you've also done an audiobook. So well done on that.
Thanks.
So how did you figure out? So now we've got this 240,000 words. And then, as you're saying, it's like I also had to add things to the book, because I had to add transitions and add things. How did you figure out what to leave in and what to take out and what to add? How do you do that?
Well, I didn't figure some of those things out really until the end of our process of the three of us working together. I couldn't have created the book that's being published today without working with you, Melody Ann, and without working with Brenda, because I didn't know. I didn't understand enough about the themes as they relate to the premise of my book, the promise for the reader. And very often, what was fantastic is we had what we thought was a solid working draft. And that's when Brenda said, we need another set of professional eyes on this. We're both very close to it now. And let's bring in my colleague, Melody Ann, and have her read it. And of course, you read it for the first time. You knew nothing about me. And that's where we began the work of, okay, this doesn't fit. And then you asked a lot of questions about, well, we need something here. There's something, what was going on? You probed, what was going on? Well, that needs to be in here, because if I didn't get it, your reader's not going to get it. And that was enormously helpful. And I feel well trained at this point, having finished one book. I enjoyed it tremendously, so I'm going to write some more. I'm obviously not a memoir, but I've got some other ideas in the self-help category. But I won't work without a coach and an editor, a structural editor. It was incredibly valuable to have your input and to work as a team with Brenda. And now that I've had that experience, I would want that again. I wouldn't go on my own.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Now, if I can talk about our work a little bit, there were times when I would say, why is this important? Why does the reader care? And it specifically, I think this is a really, and I didn't say it that way, just so everyone knows, I'm not that cruel. It's like, who cares? I don't say it that way. Brenda and I are far more gentle than that. Anyways, we would say, I would say, well, yeah, I know you love this person and this person is really important to you, but why are you telling that person's story other than how it relates to you? And that was something I wanted you to take out. It's like all these people you love and they're dear and they're so important to you. And yet I said to you, look, unless the only parts of their story you need to tell are the pieces that relate directly to your story. Don't go off on tangents on their life. As much as they're beautiful people, don't do it. And like that, was that hard?
It was. When I started, and I think about my life up until what was the year 1991, and I was born in 57, so I was an adult. Probably the most special relationship I had was with my mother's mother. And so my grandmother, we called her Mimi. She adored me. I adored her. So many of my values came from her. I have wonderful, wonderful, rich memories of my time with her. And I was living in Sydney, Australia. And for Christmas, I bought my mother, my brother, my sister a ticket to come down and visit me in Sydney. The day after they all arrived, and this is my mother there, Mimi died. And we got the phone call in the morning that Mimi died. And so I wrote about that in The Story of My Life because it impacted me. And what you pointed out was, yes, it did. And lots of other things in your life impacted you. Let's see if we find a way that this connects to the story you're telling. And it didn't. And it made sense to me. And now that, of course, I read the story, it doesn't fit. And maybe that's another story. That's something. And that's what I heard from both of you was this is a meaningful story for you. And maybe it shows up in some other writing that you do. It's just not part of this story. And it took me months of working together before I could see something and say, oh, I think this is that. I think this is one of those pieces that doesn't need to be here. And, I didn't invent the phrase killing your darlings, but my joke is in my writing room, my floor looks like a battlefield from the Civil War. I killed so many darlings, but I saved the drafts. I still love those stories, so I'm not getting rid of them, but they didn't fit. And it makes total sense now. And I'm thrilled with what we put together, and I'm very proud of the book.
Yeah. And I love that you're saying, and I'm willing to go back to those stories because they are important to me and they could be important to readers. You could do a collection of short stories that didn't make this book that affected your life, that you get to bring in other people's stories for people who love this book. So there's lots of ways that you can still use those stories. So I think that's a beautiful thing. So you have spent a lifetime, in a sense, mastering yourself.
Yes.
Yeah. And what you do is you now support other people, and you've done it for a long time, mastering themselves. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. When I was, this was in 1990 through 1997, I was living in Sydney, Australia. And for the first time, I had an executive level position at a company where I was in charge of a team of managers. And we had 110 employees in the organization. And I was in charge of their training. And so I hired some consultants and took some courses and did some formal learning and basically did train the trainer programs with them and started with it was a wonderful curriculum and started working with this team. They responded beautifully, a super group of people. It was very rewarding. And at the same time, I was engaged in my education as an equestrian, and my goal was to go to the Olympics, and my goal was to become a world-class equestrian. And I was training with a man from Portugal who was, his title was Master of Equitation. And he was a one-of-a-kind trainer. He took me under his wing and I became his protege. So I started watching him and I asked the question, what does it take to become masterful at something? And then I started teaching people to train their horses. And when they were struggling, I noticed they were struggling with managing their lives. They were walking into the arena with the horse already frustrated, already stressed, a little discombobulated, not able to focus. And I thought, well, that happened before they got in this arena with the horse. If they could manage their lives more effectively, they'd train more effectively. And so I developed a course for equestrians at that point. And it was successful, and people thought they were life management skills, very straightforward. And so I combined that with what I was teaching in the management world with leadership skills and team building skills and pure management skills, and started to build a curriculum that I offered to the public. And they were well received. And then in 2020, I had given my last course out in Phoenix, Arizona, and COVID hit. That was the end of face-to-face training, which all my seminars had been. And people said, well, you have great material. What if you repurposed it and put it online? And so now that I've been out in Florida for 2.5 years and I declare myself thriving and healed, that became my project. And I've just completed them. And the website went up with my first courses this week. So it's brand new. I have one called the Mastery Course. I have one called Leading Teams and one called Eliminating Stress. And so, and I'm real happy with how they came out. And so it's a new phase for me.
That's beautiful. Well, congratulations on the book and the new courses. That's, well, they're not new courses, but the rebirth of the courses. And I love what you just said. You know, when people couldn't manage their horses, it was because they couldn't manage themselves, because we are integrated beings. We aren't, you know, and sometimes we're good in one area and not so good in the other, but we are still integrated beings. Before we go, do you have any last words, Gil?
I think to your audience, the word would be, if you're listening to you, then you're in the right place, because I don't know a writer who can pull off a publishable piece of work without having professional input, without having somebody there to help. And the other thing I learned was that I wanted to share is, like Nike says, just do it. If you have ideas in your head, get them out, put them, get your keys on a keyboard, your fingers on a keyboard, or pick up a pen, however you collect all that, and just get it out of your head, because that's what I ended up doing. So just write it, Gil. Just write it, and then work with it, discard it, keep it, polish it, whatever. But I think when I would feel like I was about to get stuck, it was because I was working too hard. I was overthinking. I was processing too hard. And at some point, my best friend, and he's in the book with a big role, he would just say, just write your story. Just get it out of your head and write your story. And it was great coaching, because then I found my way to professionals who can help me. So it is, just do it. Just get it out of your head and write it.
Yeah, that's really good advice for a memoir, especially the first time you write it, because the first time, I always say, the first time you get your story out, it's for healing, it's for personal growth and development.
Yep.
Then you can think about the reader later, but never think about the reader first off. First, just get the story out. Thank you for joining us today on Author Nation, Gil. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here today.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I enjoyed it very much.
Good. And thank you for joining us on Author Nation Interviews. So I hope you found this conversation educational. These are topics that are really, really important. Personally to me and to the world, I think we need to start recognizing trauma and working with people, supporting them because everyone has something really valuable to give the rest of the world. So thank you for listening, and we value your feedback and we value your support. So if you've enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave a comment or review and share this with someone who will find it valuable because your engagement helps us continue to bring you insightful content and serve the nonfiction community. Now, keep writing, keep creating, and keep sharing your stories with the world.